Hello and welcome to the Debating Toastcast, a podcast about all things debating. From the Debate Toastmasters Club, 104 London Debaters.
Hello, I'm William and I am the host of 104 London Debaters Toastcast, the Debating Toastcast. It's a Toastcast because it's not a normal podcast. Why? Because 104 London Debaters is a Toastmasters Club. Now, we also have an online club as part of our, shall we say, fauna, and that's called, originally enough, 104 Online Debaters. And I'm very glad to have with me today one of the great debaters, contributors, debate coaches from the Online Debate Club, Andrew McDonnell. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, William. Thank you for that very warm introduction. It's great to be here with you on this Toastcast.
Now we have a bit of a special episode this time. It's we have actually recorded a debate. This was done a couple of months ago or 3 months ago, many more months ago than any of us care to remember because time just flies too fast. And we recorded that at a pub on a stage, live in front of audiences, as they say, with the purpose of it being an example debate. I'm not sure, Andy, if you would say, is it an example of what to do or what not to do?
Well, it could be a bit of both, couldn't it? I think that will be for our listeners and viewers to decide for themselves. But the aim was certainly to demonstrate how structured debate works in practice. And things do not always go to plan, but we do give an example from opening statements through rebuttals and then summaries on the use of evidence and building strong arguments and, crucially, engaging respectfully with opposing views.
Indeed, taking turns. And when you are in a in-person setting where you are actually debating with other people, even though in an online debate club, you can't just cancel other people when they disagree with you. You have to actually engage with the argument, which of course is the whole point. So what we're going to do now is we're going to listen to the debate as we recorded it back then. Now, unfortunately, we had a bit of a technical issue. So after we're going to hear the main arguments, the introduction from the proposition, which is me. Then we are going to hear the main statement from the opposition, which is Andy. Then there's a bit of a rebuttal back and forth where we try and engage with one another's arguments and have what is known in debating as the clash. And then we were supposed to have questions and answers from the audience, and a few things are said during that period, which I then use as the basis for my for delivering my summary statement, and Andy would have done the same. So, and I mentioned that specifically because when we come back from the recording, Andy and I will give our summary statements, but they may include one or two points that you didn't hear in the recording simply because it got cut off before we got to it. But they were points mentioned. And the reason I say that is very important because in a formal debate, you are not allowed as the summary speaker to introduce new points that have not been mentioned during the debate. Now, in other debate settings, that may be perfectly fine, certainly in more sort of informal settings, or where you have a different format, such as at the Agora Club in London, just to get a mention of that. That there are no strict rules about what you can say in your summary. That's really up to each person. But in a formal debate, you're not really allowed to introduce new points. So just wanted to mention that because you may notice that, oh, I don't think he said that during the recording, but it was said during the debate, the bit of the that wasn't recorded essentially. But what I would also recommend you to do is that when you get to the end of the recording, press pause and then try to think of how you would summarize what you've heard. both for the proposition and the opposition, what would be the most effective way in 2 or 3 minutes to really summarize the arguments. Anything else you think, Andy, that people should listen out for?
They could, in fact, given that we repurposed this recording recently in a session on how to build a strong argument. And even if those who are viewing this may not have seen that session or participated in it, it may be useful to try to pick out some of the techniques that William and I rely on, some of the evidence that we use, perhaps even a logical fallacy, dare I say. No, we wouldn't commit any of those, would we? But we never know. Perhaps maybe a hidden premise. There may be any number of these things going on in there, but I think it may actually be most useful to focus on not just on what is being said, the content, but also how it is said, because that is also important when you're trying to win. Basically, you're trying to win over the audience, and simply bombarding them with facts in a monotonous drawl may not achieve that aim in itself. So I'd try to listen out for some techniques, the broad structure of our arguments, maybe some rhetorical flourishes in there as well. Whatever you can pick out that you think is useful, and then perhaps reflect on why that was useful, or what the name might be for that technique or strategy.
I would also just specifically mention something called the stasis. So that's the literally the standing still. Basically, what's the common ground before we start disagreeing? And that's a very important thing in a debate, that you also establish what the debate is not about, so that the debate doesn't sort of veer unto irrelevant byways. First of all, this is what the debate is not about, and then what is the debate about? Where do we disagree? So is that being made clear in this debate? And what is the controversy? What is the central point of disagreement? And of course, as Andy said, the backings and the research gone into trying to get factual backing for each claim. So another question might be, also following on from what you said there, Andy, sort of is every claim made backed up with some sort of like backing from an expert, or from studies, or some sort of example? Is every claim backed up? Because if it's not backed up, then essentially you can disregard it. And with those preliminaries, let us now watch and listen to this debate. Get the popcorn ready and pen and paper, and then we'll see you straight after the debate.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Neither of us up here are scientists, and so I'm sure we both agree to go with the consensus that the Earth is warming, and that man-made emissions of climate gases are contributing to this development, and that a warming planet is indeed a problem that needs to be solved. Where we disagree is on the how, in particular the usefulness, or otherwise, of the net zero carbon targets set out in the Paris Agreement 2015 and since. And to be clear, the target set in Paris was to keep global warming to well below 2 degrees centigrade of pre-industrial levels, and pursue efforts to keep them below 1.5 degrees centigrade by reaching net zero in the second half of this century. Okay? Now, the way this was to be achieved was that each country sets their own nationally determined targets, with many individual countries obviously going much further and having more ambitious targets, including the United Kingdom. Now, net zero, what does that mean? So that means that any human-caused greenhouse gas emissions are fully offset by an equivalent amount taken out of the atmosphere. Now, my argument is that setting such a goal with an arbitrary timeline for achieving net zero is a fool's errand. It's basically setting the cart before the horse, because we do not know how to get there. And there are two main reasons why I believe this is the wrong way to go about it. First of all, reaching net zero is quite simply impossible with today's technology. We are currently capturing only 0.1% of global carbon emitted. But the second reason is that even if we were able, it is undesirable. Because, we're not able to meet them, but if we were, the cost of actually doing so with today's technology would leave us all worse off, with the poorest in the world condemned to continued poverty. Now, according to a UN report produced by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that summarizes and analyzes all the various climate actions and all the plans by all these various countries in the world, what they found was that the current sort of contribution from each country, all their individual plans, if they all added it up, and if they all implemented them perfectly, which we are not, by a vast, far stretch on a path to doing at all. But if they were, global emissions in 2030, 5 years from now, would only be 2 to 2.5% below 2019 level. And that's far short of the 43% reduction that we need to be in line with Paris. Since 2009, the amount of greenhouse gases emitted has not decreased. It hasn't stayed on an even path. It has increased. It has increased with CO2 alone going from 30 gigatons, so that's 30 billion tons, in 2009 to 37 gigatons last year, 2024. So we are way, way off track. And on my second point, that it is undesirable even if we were somehow able to do it, that is based on a very simple fact that we have no way of doing it without making ourselves substantially poorer, according to the IPCC's own numbers. Now, the best example, actually, of how a reduction in carbon emissions can be achieved with today's technology is, of course, the global COVID-19 pandemic. If you remember, even for all the global reduction in economic and human activity, with all the misery that went with it, we only managed a reduction of 1.2 gigatons out of 37 gigatons, okay? So how many pandemics do we need to get down to zero? And with the current technology, we can only capture 50 million metric tons, okay? So that's nothing, that's 0.1 of global emissions. So, my dear friends, if there is no realistic way of achieving the Paris goals, then pursuing unrealistic goals is not only futile, but it risks diverting our attention away from what can and indeed should be done. And it risks creating political opposition as people in the West see rising energy bills, people in the poorer parts of the world feel unfairly held back, and therefore it is simply the wrong path to take to a goal that we may all agree with. And therefore I commend this motion to the House. Thank you very much.
So we can both agree, at the very least, that we are not experts in this field, neither of us. However, we can rely on the wealth of expertise that is out there. And today we are being asked whether we should abandon net zero targets. I stand firmly opposed to this motion. To abandon net zero would be to abandon scientific reality, economic opportunity, and moral responsibility. The first reason is necessity. Net zero is not some fashionable slogan. It is the minimum requirement set out by the world's leading scientists. The IPCC tells us that global emissions must fall by 45% by 2030 and reach net zero around the mid-century point if we are to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. Beyond that threshold, we do not simply get warmer summers, less rainfall. We risk crossing irreversible tipping points. The collapse of polar ice sheets, the dieback of Amazon rainforest,
and the release of vast stores of carbon from thawing permafrost. Indeed, we are already living with the consequences of just 1.2 degrees of warming. In 2022, just a few years ago, floods displaced 33 million people in Pakistan. The WHO warns that climate change will cause an additional 255,000 deaths per year between 2030 and 2050 from malnutrition, malaria, and heat stress. The second reason is economics. Now, critics may argue that net zero is too expensive. Bjorn Lomborg, for instance, suggests that decarbonisation could cost the global economy trillions, while delivering limited benefits. That's his argument. But his framing is somewhat misleading because it measures only the costs of the transition while ignoring the far greater costs of inaction. The IMF estimates that climate change could shrink global GDP by 18% by the end of the century if we fail to act, while the World Bank warns that climate impacts could push 132 million people into poverty within the next 25 years. By contrast, the International Energy Agency calculates that achieving net zero requires investment of just 2% of global GDP annually. That is an investment smaller than global defence spending, and one that pays itself back in fuel savings, health improvements, and new industries. Moreover, the technologies that we need are no longer prohibitively expensive. The cost of solar power has fallen by 90% in the past decade. Offshore wind is now cheaper than gas in many markets. In fact, renewable energy accounted for 83% of all new electricity capacity added worldwide in 2022. The cost of action is an investment. The cost of inaction is a debt that we will never repay. Thirdly, if we do abandon the net zero goal, we don't avoid any costs in doing so. We simply lock ourselves out of the technologies and industries of the future, those which will come to define the 21st century economy. Even if we were to officially abandon these targets, public opinion isn't going to change overnight. Therefore, ethical investment decisions are not going to change. We're already set on a course of action, and the targets are a metric of our progress towards a common goal. And targets do matter. They're not merely symbolic. They are a compass. They provide a guide for governments, business, and investors. Without targets, there's no direction, no accountability, and no sense of urgency, which we do need. Now, I recognise that the target is ambitious, and we may not achieve it. That is the way with government targets, isn't it? Let's say we're supposed to be building 300,000 new homes a year in this country. We build maybe around 200,000, but I put it to you that perhaps that's far more than we would be building were there no target at all and no government policies and incentives coming from that. So we would still have made far greater progress towards the goal than were we to abandon it altogether. And let's be clear, we don't abandon targets because they are difficult. We pursue them because the alternative is something far worse. Now, I'll turn to Bjorn Lomborg's central claim that money spent on net zero would be better spent on poverty reduction or disease prevention. That seems reasonable at first glance, but that is a false choice because climate change is not separate from these problems. It in fact makes them worse. Tackling climate change is not a distraction from human development. It is a precondition for it. Abandoning net zero will not save us money. It will simply send the invoice to our children and their children. So the choice before us is clear. If we abandon net zero targets, we accept higher temperatures, deadlier disasters, economic decline, and moral failure. If we uphold it, we seize the chance for resilience, competitiveness, and a safer world. The real fantasy is in thinking we can continue to burn fossil fuels and somehow avoid the consequences altogether. Therefore, I urge the House to reject the motion. Thank you.
So to respond firstly to some of the points that Andrew talked about, he talked about a moral responsibility. Well, what is that moral responsibility? The fact is that according to the official figures from the IPCC itself, climate change will indeed lead to a potential of 24 million more people in risk of starvation due to higher prices of food in particular. However, climate policies are also costly. And therefore, not least because they also drive up the price of energy, you see. So food prices can rise as much as by 110% in today's, relative to today's money. Now, what that means is that as many as 78 million more people may be at risk of starvation. Okay? So my question then is, who is it we are going to tell that you can starve? Because we've got enough here. We're fine. All right? And we can afford it. We can afford these luxury policies. But we are going to have to point to someone in the world and say, you're going to starve because of these policies. And we're okay with that, are we? You know, that's not morally acceptable at all. And in terms of value added, okay, so the thing is, again, the UN's IPCC committee in 2017 had a report done looking at 5 different scenarios with different, how, you know, this might pan out in terms of if we pursue different policies, okay? Now, I'm going to concentrate on 2 of them. One was called the sustainable path. So this is where some levels are taken, some policies are taken rather in order to deal with climate change. In that scenario, okay, in 2100, the world will be approximately 600% better off, so 6 times better off than we are today. If we just go with fossil fuels and we don't really care about cutting, then we will be 1,040% better off, so 10 times better off. Okay, so we will be better off with fossil fuels. However, my argument is not necessarily that we do nothing, because that is, of course, a completely false choice. It's not either net zero or do nothing at all. The question is, what should we do? What are the right ways forward? And just pursuing an unreachable and unrealistic goal is not realistic at all.
So you picked up on the point that I made about the moral responsibility. And what I mean by that is that we do have a need to act rather than do nothing. And I take the point that it's not an either or it's not do nothing at all. But I don't think that these 2 things are mutually exclusive. We can have a target which then acts as a metric for progress. If we abandon the target, then what are we doing? What are we aiming for? It really is paralleled with my example of the house building target. And now we could say that, well, building 1.5 million homes within the next parliament is unrealistic and probably won't happen either. But we will build more than were we not striving towards a target, towards a goal. And yes, perhaps if we were to just go hell for leather with fossil fuels and use up all the gas and the oil, then we might be better off economically. But it's not all about economics, because if we do that, then we risk the effects of climate change being far worse than they would otherwise be. So it's all very well to say, oh, well, X number of people will starve in this scenario or in this other scenario. But if we take that course of action and we just continue with the fossil fuels, then our consumption will increase, won't it? Because you concede that the economy will grow, we'll be better off, therefore consumption will increase, economic growth, and so we will be using up even more fossil fuels than we are today. We don't really know if we've reached the fabled peak oil yet. So if we do that, then that's only going to worsen the situation in terms of harvests, crop failures. We see it even in this country where we have a temperate climate. Farmers will tell you this. Even Jeremy Clarkson accepts this, right? And he's basically just a multimillionaire hobby farmer. He now accepts that this is real. It's changing. It is leading to crop failure. And that's in a country where we have a very temperate climate and very fertile soil.
Sure. Well, first of all, when it comes to crops, CO2 is actually something that helps plants to grow. It is a natural occurring gas, so it can also have beneficial effects. But yes, on balance, it will have a more negative effect. The question is only that if we go too far down the route of taking actions that we do not know how to do it, then what we have to do, the only way to do it, is to depress economic activity. And when we talk about, so Andy said that, oh, it's not just about economy. No, of course it's not just about economy. Or what does economy enable you to do? Okay, if you are in a poor country, you cannot build as good protections against flooding, for example, or extreme temperatures. You need money to do that. Okay, in the Netherlands, they are under sea level, but they don't flood. Why? Because it's a wealthy country. They're able to build the protections against it. The reason why the house building analogy fails is that we know how to build houses. We have the technology, we have the knowledge, we have the know-how. We can just say how many houses we want to build and just get on and do it. We do not know how to reach net zero, not without either capturing it, and our technology at the moment, as I said, only allows us to capture 0.1%, or depress economic activity in the same way as we did during COVID-19, which will make everybody, and particularly the poorest, much worse off and less able to build the dikes, less able to build the protections, less able to have the malaria vaccines, less able to have education, and so forth and so on, in order to adapt to the inevitable warming. Because even if we stopped emitting everything tomorrow, the already existing concentration of climate gases will continue to push the temperature up for the next 100 years, okay? So the fact is we have to adapt, and we don't have unlimited resources. We simply don't. So it is a choice between one or the other.
There is a choice. We can continue down this path of pursuing a goal, and I don't think we're doing enough. You mentioned earlier the Paris Agreement, and I think that what we can both agree on, and Bjorn Lomborg also concedes, that it doesn't go far enough to achieve the goal. But that doesn't mean that we abandon the goal altogether. It just means that we haven't yet found the right set of policies to achieve it. If we abandon it, then what's the alternative? We abandon the goal. We go back to fossil fuels. I take the point about developing countries and them not having the resources to build the flood defences, etc. But renewable energies are cheaper for developing countries which don't have the infrastructure to extract fossil fuels. If they have them, that is. They only exist in a few parts of the world in quantities that are realistic to extract. So we think about Africa and Asia. Solar power makes sense for them. You know, they might not have oil reserves or gas, so that's all going to be based on imports, and that we are also beholden to the OPEC oil producing cartel. Look where that leads. It leads to wars, conflict. They control the price and the output as well. What we really should be striving for is a state of energy independence, and we're never going to get there if we rely so heavily on imports, neither here nor abroad. So fossil fuels they're just not a realistic answer to this. They're going to run out, and we're going to need more energy, not less energy. So when we talk about cutting back, it's about cutting back on the emissions, on the carbon produced, and carbon capture is one thing. That can't do it all. We're never going to capture all of the carbon that we produce. So it needs to be a combination of solutions. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to this problem. We can capture some carbon, perhaps at source. If there's a factory, there could be a way to capture that carbon. You're never going to suck all the carbon out of the atmosphere that we produce. And of course, we need some carbon dioxide. It is naturally occurring as well. Yes. But how do we do that? Well, we stop producing so much of it, don't we? We move to renewable energies, of which there are many. It's not just all solar and wind. There's nuclear power. I know that's perhaps a dirty word, but that can be very clean and carbon neutral as well. And how about planting trees? Or maybe we incentivize countries like Brazil to stop cutting down the rainforest, which is very important. Trees, when it comes to trees, they are a carbon capture, and it matters where they are located. It's far more beneficial for them to be in the rainforest than for us to say reforest Britain. It won't make as much difference.
Okay, so if I may say, so the thing is, of course, we may do some of those things. That's perfectly fine. But the thing is, the reason why we need to get rid of the goal is that just having a goal will not make us reach it. It makes us feel warm and fuzzy that, oh, we're doing something, but we're not really doing the right thing. What we need is motivation. What we need to do is to tax carbon, okay, so that it's expensive to use it and expensive to overuse it. And then we need to invest money into new technology, because I agree with what Andy said about technology. I think this is a point where we can both agree. We need new technology. That is because the only way to continue to lift people out of poverty is to have cheap and reliable energy available. Otherwise, are we going to tell people in poor countries of the world, whether it's an Indian countryside or an African or other country where people are really struggling to make ends meet, where they are cooking over open fires, which is really detrimental to your health, where they just want light on so that children can study and read at night, okay? Things that we take for granted. That is what is being enabled by cheap and reliable energy, which is what oil and gas really does supply. So that is what we need to think about. Now, so when I say we need the right motivation, okay? Setting up, for example, prices for developing new technology. This is really important. Think about, do you all remember how governments try to force us away from the incandescent light bulb? And we had these really rubbish light bulbs. You turn them on and then 2 hours later, the light perhaps came on if you were lucky, right? These were horrible. And yet governments pushed and pushed and pushed because they had a goal. They had a goal, so they just pushed for it. Then suddenly new technology came along, LED. And what happened? These silly, expensive light bulbs were just completely wiped off the market, and LED has now taken over. It's much cheaper, much more reliable, it's much less energy for each unit of light. Okay, that is what we need, and that needs to be the focus.
Can I just very briefly come back on the light bulb point, because I agree with that, and that was an exercise in stupidity from a policy perspective, but that's very specific. And I agree with that. We should have just waited for the LED technology to come along, which was a few years down the line.
They had a goal.
I know they had a goal, but that was a very specific point. The net zero goal is an overarching goal. We're not going to have new forms of lighting imposed on us just because of net zero in 2050. That was daft, and we know that, and we should have waited. And Matt Ridley makes that point in his very excellent book. But targets can also encourage innovation, because industries respond to government policy. Think of solar panels, down 90% in cost in a decade because of policy-driven demand. Demand goes up, they are produced more cheaply, and policy can be the wellspring of innovation. It can stifle it, I do take that point, but it can also do the opposite.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right, well, there we are. That was the recorded debate. Now, perhaps you have done your own summary, as I suggested at the beginning, or perhaps you just want to hear what we said. Well, let us now, as close as possible, give our summary statements of the debate as it was given on the night. Now, in debates at 104 London Debaters and many other formal debate situations, because the proposition has the burden of proof, we allow them to summarize last, to sort of get the last word, if you like. And so therefore, the first summary statement will be from the opposition speaker, Andrew McDonnell. So Andy, when you're ready, please go.
Thank you. This debate is not about whether climate change is real. As we laid out at the start, both sides accept that it is. The real question is whether, in the face of that reality, we choose to act with purpose or drift without direction. Net zero is not an abstract ideal or a fashionable slogan. It is the necessary target that gives meaning, structure, and urgency to climate action. The scientific case is unequivocal. According to the IPCC, global emissions must fall sharply this decade and reach net zero around the mid-century point, if we are to avoid the most dangerous impacts. At just 1.2 degrees C of warming, we are already seeing devastating consequences: mass displacement from flooding, rising heat-related deaths, and escalating health crises. Beyond 1.5 degrees, we risk triggering irreversible tipping points, from ice sheet collapse to rainforest destruction. Abandoning net zero does not change these physical realities. It simply removes our collective response to them. Economically, abandoning targets is an act of short-sightedness. Critics focus narrowly on the costs of the transition whilst ignoring the vastly greater costs of inaction. Institutions like the IMF and the World Bank warn that unchecked climate change could slash global GDP, deepening poverty and destabilizing economies. By contrast, achieving net zero requires investment of around 2% of global GDP. That's less than current defense spending on average, whilst delivering long-term returns through cheaper energy, improved public health, and new industries. Renewables are no longer speculative technologies. Solar, wind, and clean energy are already the cheapest sources of new power in much of the world, to say nothing of the potential for nuclear power to provide a base load. Crucially, targets matter. Net zero provides a shared benchmark against which governments, businesses, and investors can plan, innovate, and be held accountable. Without a target, there is no coordination, no sense of urgency, and no way to measure progress. Abandoning the net zero target does not save money or increase flexibility, it simply leaves us adrift, making fragmented, insufficient, inconsistent efforts whilst climate change damage accelerates. Even if the target is not fully met, we acknowledge it's a very ambitious goal indeed. Striving towards it drives far greater progress than would abandoning it entirely. We do not discard goals because they are difficult. We pursue them because the alternative is failure. Climate action is not in competition with poverty or public health. It is fundamental to both. Net zero is the compass. Without it, we are not choosing realism, we are choosing paralysis. And for that reason, the motion must be rejected. So vote with the opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And now I will summarize for the proposition. Ladies and gentlemen, the OECD's 2024 Climate Action Monitor finds that globally we are falling way short of the cuts needed to be in line with the Paris goals. And the UN's own figures tell us that reaching them with today's technology would make the world considerably poorer than it otherwise would have been. And poorer does not just mean not being able to afford a second car. Poorer means not being able to have the lights on in the evening so your children can study. Poorer means not having access to healthcare and sanitation. Poorer means having to cook with an open fire, extremely detrimental to health and longevity. Poorer means not having the opportunities that people like us in this room take for granted. Whom would you like to condemn to remain for longer in poverty, just to hold on to these arbitrary goals? Who? How much carbon can we capture with today's technology? Well, according to the International Energy Agency, the IEA, we can capture 40 million tons. That's the equivalent of around 3 million London buses. But globally, we are emitting the equivalent of 3 billion London buses worth of greenhouse gases. So we're emitting 3 billion buses worth of greenhouse gases. We're capturing only 3 million of them. Or in other words, 0.1% of total emissions. Now, do you know how many buses that is? Imagine lining them up to the moon and back. You can go 44 times back and forth with London buses. That is how far away we are from reaching net zero. Now, that's not to say that we won't achieve it at some point. It is just a question of how. But the focus must not be on unreachable goals that are currently losing political support. Scrapping net zero does not, however, mean doing nothing. Instead, we should focus on three things. One is a carbon tax to price in the damage from increased temperatures and encourage less carbon usage. Two, building resilience through adaptation to a warmer climate, which is much easier when you are wealthier than when you are poorer. And three, investment in technology to enable us to move away from fossil fuels without making everyone, including the poor, poorer. The current goals are simply not getting us there. They are, however, giving us a false sense of security that something is being done, and therefore, my friends, let us get rid of this fig leaf of a policy and face the realities honestly. Please support this motion. Thank you.
And we're back in the room, as it were, although not physically.
The Zoom room.
The Zoom room, indeed. That was a lively, engaging, and fruitful debate, if I do say so myself. Just to wind back a bit then, when we decided on the motion, and I know that we wanted to choose something that was relevant and that people could engage with, it was current, it was topical, which net zero is, because it's ever present. It's still informing policy all the time, even though this goal is supposedly already there, set in stone. And things are rolling back a little bit, then they go forward a little bit. So there is this kind of seesaw in policy terms. So it is ever present, isn't it, in the public discourse? And I thought it was a really good choice because everyone, even people that and you come across these people all the time who say, I'm not political, I don't do politics, but everyone is aware, at least aware of what this is, and it does impact everyone.
Yeah.
Literally everything. It pervades everything. I mean, you make a point in the debate about light bulbs, which is funny, and I knew exactly where that came from as you were saying it, because I have Matt Ridley's book as well, How Innovation Works, and it is a funny example, but it is also a very telling one, and so it was good that you made that point.
Perhaps we should say a little bit about how we actually went about preparing practically, because it's something that I know a lot of debaters, particularly those who are new and not overly experienced, actually really struggle with. Where do you start? How do you go about finding the right information, the right backing for your claims and all that sort of stuff? How did you start? I know you're in the opposition, so that adds an extra element of difficulty because you don't know exactly what I'm going to say, although in order to make it an educational debate, I think I did give you some pointers as to this is what I'm going to be focusing on rather than something else. But still, what were your thought processes there in terms of how you actually got going into the whole research thing?
Yes, that's a very pertinent question, isn't it? And so I think I started by focusing on the motion, the definition of the motion, because it's so easy to get carried away and to just take the climate change ball and run with it. But we were talking about a policy matter, as you said previously. So it is about the net zero target that's in place that many countries around the world have agreed to. This 2050 goal around the mid-century point. It seems to be a bit of leeway around it, but it's that idea. So I did have to, just to illustrate how stark the climate change issue is. So I had to outline some statistics and examples of what we're already living with, what the impacts are, and how bad it could be if we do nothing. That is to say, if we don't make the progress that the IPCC says that we have to do, or the IMF says that the GDP will shrink if we don't act. So many millions of people will be pushed into poverty, etc., etc. So I knew I needed to come armed with the facts, with some of those figures, to illustrate the reality and drive home to people. This is the problem we face, and this is the solution that's been drawn up. It may not be perfect, but I'm arguing to keep it in place because otherwise we have no solution at all. We have nothing concrete. So firstly, it was to set out what the problem was and then almost defend the solution that we have. So I then had to come up with a few, I want to say clever arguments, but that it's not to say that I'm being clever. I wanted them to sound clever. That's a very different thing. I wanted them to sound convincing. I wanted them.
You always sound clever, Andy. So no worries about that.
Thank you, William. But it was, and it well, they're not my arguments, are they? Because I'm not the expert, as we set out at the start, didn't we? We said we're not experts, but we are relying on the expertise of others. So they're not my arguments. I had to go and look for them. Google is a very good starting point. Who would have thought that? So it's that, isn't it? It's I had to research a couple of things. So then the climate change issue and the impacts thereof, and then adjacent to that, the net zero package, the whole suite of measures, or that broad target, and why it's in place and why we should keep it. And that came down to economics, really, that it's already baked into the economy. There's all this investment that's already happened. Policy does alter investment decisions, etc., etc.
Yeah.
It was really that, and then just framing that in such a way that it would fit my arguments. That no, we should not abolish this because we need a target. Why do we need a target? Well, targets are important. What is a target? Well, a target is a metric of progress towards this goal that we're striving to achieve. I don't mean to go all Boris Johnson there, but it kind of when you're there and you're in the zone, and there's so much information there. I mean,
yes.
But then again, so you do the research, and you have to pick your arguments carefully. I mean, there's so many examples I could have drawn upon. I actually went for a bit of the shock factor with some of them, to be honest, which I think is fair enough. I mean, look, it comes from the IPCC. It's not a controversial source. I mean, that some of the claims are contentious, and we know that. But look, ultimately, I'm citing experts and respectable institution. So, so it boiled down to that. And then I did just add in a few little bits of my own that I was keen to get in, which was I think it was to do with oil, the OPEC cartel of oil producing countries, and how we can't go on doing that. Okay, we can do a bit more of that, but that's clearly not sustainable anyway. So it's not as if we can just keep relying on fossil fuels forevermore, because there will come a point where they effectively run out. And I think it was in the Q&A section, which unfortunately we don't get to see, where I was able to make the point in response to a question that although there may be much more oil and gas than we've currently tapped, not only some of it is economically viable to extract. So there will come a point where, although yes, there might be some shale gas that we could frack out of Montana or somewhere, blow up a national park or something, but it's not economically viable, is it? So we can't continue down that road. So there has to be an alternative. And I was keen also not to get hamstrung or hoisted by my own green eco-friendly petard with the whole wind and solar world, because ultimately it doesn't really matter where the energy comes from. It just has to be sustainable. And I know that nuclear is a dirty word, apparently. And in the Q&A that came up as well. For some, it shouldn't be, because actually, and again, it was in the Q&A, so people watching this recording might get the idea that I'm all for wind and solar and all those renewables. But actually, when I didn't want to commit because I didn't want to alienate anyone, so that's important. If I had been arguing really from my true beliefs and principles, then yes, I probably would have said, okay, let's keep the target for now, because it at least gives us something to aim for, but let's not be so prescriptive about it, and let's go hell for leather on nuclear energy, because it's really the only way to replace the base load that we're currently getting from gas. But I didn't say all of that in the speech because that would be committing myself too firmly to a very specific stance, and I wanted to leave all of that open-ended. So yes, to come back to the research, I had to really pick and choose and then allow that to inform my arguments whilst kind of almost restraining myself from what I really wanted to say, which was just to be an evangelist for nuclear power. But I don't think that would have helped my cause on the
No,
day.
so I mean, you raised several very interesting points there, if I may pick up on, because first of all, I think you raised the point of starting quite broadly, of just sort of reading up and finding out some facts that may be supportive to your case, and then narrowing it more and more as you find the good points and the things that can work, and then allowing that then to inform the points that you are going to be using in your actual debate sort of speeches, etc. And then you said you don't want to say something that might alienate people unnecessarily, so don't start sort of going very strong for something that you may feel about personal affinity towards, but that may alienate someone in the audience who would otherwise have voted for you. And I think that's a very good point, because very often people do in debates, they start saying things that actually they don't need to say, and the only function it has is to push some of the people away in the audience. And that's something I write about in my book, by the way. I don't know if you can see it, The Practical Guide to Debating. There you go, I'll bring up a picture of it. It's about, you can never fully know your audience, but you can assume certain things about it, and you can create your audience by actually using phrases and frame your argument in such a way that you embrace them rather than push them away. So I thought that was a very good point to raise. And of course, also the unnecessary burden of proof. If you started claiming that we should only do nuclear is the way to go, okay, that may be true, but that's an additional burden that you don't need as the opposition, because you're opposing a particular proposition and a particular claim that I've made. And that's all you need to do is to say why we shouldn't support that particular claim. You don't have to make another claim of what we ought to do instead. So I thought that was a very good point as well. And I think what worked particularly well in the opposition in this debate is that you were able to put forward a narrative that, okay, look, we have to do something, and I was forced to obviously concede that from the start, because that was sort of the basis of the debate, was that it's happening, there's climate change, it's a bit of a problem, and it's about what we do. It's not about not doing anything at all. And so therefore you were then able to say, well, as we must do something, it's better to have a goal and perhaps fail to reach it, but at least then make progress towards it. Then at least something will happen. And of course, what I tried to do on the proposition side was to build the argument that, look, actually trying to reach it will have a devastating effect on our economy to the degree, to the extent that we will not actually be able to then adapt to the changes in the environment that will come. So actually it will be more damaging. But there's so much, like you said, there's so much facts and figures out there that you can end up sort of drowning the audience as well in just stats and facts and figures. And so when I used the Toulmin model quite extensively in preparing for this, where you start from the claim you want to make, and then why that is true, sort of the premises for that, and then the backing for those premises, factual backing, and then the warrant, which is why, if that is true, why should we then support? So that's sort of the process that I try and follow when I build an argument. And in this case, it was, we should drop this goal because we can't reach it. It's unrealistic and it will cost too much, and that will destroy our ability to then do other things that may actually be better in the long term. So that was sort of the basic argument that I tried to make. But then in order not to drown the audience out with too many facts and stats, although I had to come up with some backing, I came up with that image of London buses, because normally, it's either the country of Wales or London buses, right? I mean, those are the two great analogies we tend to use for size and so forth. So so I thought, okay, perhaps if I can illustrate it in the number of, so I did a lot of asking ChatGPT to calculate how many London buses this would be and that would be, came up with different scenarios. So I don't know whether you felt, Andy, and those listening can obviously write comments if you want to, but I don't know if you thought that London bus example or analogy illustration, whether that worked. Was it did it make it easier, or did it just make it more confusing?
I think it always helps personally to make any figures easier to digest. I mean, we're dealing with, what is it, hundreds of millions of people plunged into poverty, or billions, no, trillions of dollars spent. These are
billions
these are astronomical. They are literally astronomical. In the universe, we're dealing in billions and billions. These are not really figures that the average person can grapple with, because they don't have they don't relate to anything. I mean, yes, we know what a billion is as a figure, but
it's unfathomable.
Do we know what in relation to what? Does the average person know what the budget for education is versus the budget for healthcare versus the defense budget? What is the GDP of the United Kingdom? What is the national debt? No, and it doesn't really matter. And so, yes, I do think it was helpful, because it's a very powerful illustration. I can't even remember how many London buses it was. I just remember that when I heard it, I thought, wow, it's quite a lot. It almost makes the problem seem insurmountable, because so many London buses or Olympic swimming pools or whatever the case may be. But I think it's helpful because it makes it more digestible, and it's something that people can relate to. It conjures a mental image, doesn't it, in a way that 130 billion pounds simply does not.
Exactly, yeah, because those figures are just so outside our normal remit of our day-to-day sort of conversations and thinking. It's almost completely unfathomable. Because it's just, nobody has ever seen £1 billion or £1 billion of anything really. It's just beyond our comprehension, I think. And so I think, but even with more normal numbers, it's always useful to have comparisons. And something I think might be useful to mention here, without dragging this out too long, but I think it's useful for debaters also to remember this, that a number in and of itself is really completely meaningless. So if you come up in a debate and you say that we should do this because 25% of somebody something, okay, so why? Why does those 25% matter for supporting this particular proposition? Is that a big number? Is it a small number? Okay, so if you can say, well, there's been an increase. 5 years ago it was 5%. Now it's 25%. So it's been a massive increase in this problem, or whatever. Okay, then we can start to make sense of it. If you say, or in every other country it's 75%, here it's only 25%, it's not enough, we need to bring, okay, so then we can start to understand whether it is a big number and whether it matters, for whatever the conclusion is of the debate, which is of course the motion. You always, in a debate, funnily enough, start with a conclusion. We should vote for this, and then you have to justify it, and that's the whole point of the debate, obviously. So yeah, so comparisons, illustrations. One technique that I find quite useful in debates is that if I quote any number, any statistic, I always try and say it both as the percentage number. So, for example, 20% of people or whatever, that's 2 in 10 people, blah, blah, blah. So say it in more than one way and repeat it, because very often in a debate, when you're in the audience, you listen to it and then you hear something, percent, blah, blah, blah. Oh, what was the number? And then if you then say it again, that's useful. But it's also useful for even those who heard the first time. It's useful for them to have it repeated in a different way, just to make it a bit more graspable. So that's one little technique that I think is quite useful. And I started doing that simply because when I listen to debates myself, I very often found that when people quoted a number, I just missed it because I was busy perhaps jotting down a note from what they previously said, or my conversation, not conversation, my concentration wandered off for a second. And then suddenly they've said some really important number and I missed it. So I always appreciate when speakers or debaters repeat. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to make sure I do that. So that's just a little tip there from me. Did you have any last point you wanted to impart before we round off this special episode of the Debating Toastcast?
Only to come along and attend a meeting, be it physically or out there in the ether, whether you're a guest or new member, get involved, have a go, because it's really such a great, mind expanding, eye opening learning experience is debating. It's not simply the act of speaking and arguing rhetoric. It's so much more than that. When you have a given topic, a motion, you have to go away and research it, as we were talking about.
Yeah.
It could be a completely unfamiliar topic, or it might be something with which you have a passing acquaintance. And you then gain a deeper understanding, and you might then actually form an opinion which is based on a whole plethora of information and inputs, rather than just a headline that you may have glimpsed somewhere along the line. So read widely and deeply, broadly, and yes, just have a go. And it's it's a learning experience, and we're not necessarily in it to win, but just for the participation. It's lovely to win, isn't it? Let's
it's always more fun to win, but hey, like you say, you do learn a lot, and I've learned perhaps more in the debates I've lost, to be honest, because then you have to really think about what I did wrong. And we should also mention, sometimes in the club, you are assigned a side that you do not agree with yourself, but you have to defend that side, and to actually enter into that role and taking on the opposite role of what you yourself personally believe in can be very, very useful, both to understand how other people think with whom you don't agree. But also I found that even though, it may not change my mind about the issue, but it may actually deepen my understanding, not only of the other point of view, but even of my own point of view, because I now had to think about it a bit more carefully. So, well, we'll finish there. I have already plugged my book, and I'll shamelessly just do it one more time, because this should give you all the basics that you need, and I've tried to make it as practical as possible. So it's about okay, what do you actually do to get going with your research, to sit down and when you're trying to put together an argument, what elements do you actually need to put in there, and what do you do? So so I hope you'll find it useful. And there's also a chapter, as I think Andy mentioned this earlier in our conversation, the hidden premise. How do you identify the hidden premise? This is quite important in debates, to be able to do that. And that's I've got a chapter on that, also on how to deal with questions and answers when you are in a debate that has that sort of thing. So so anyway, I hope you'll check that out. Well, it only remains for me now to say thank you very much to Andrew for agreeing to do the debate in the first place, which was a fair bit of work, but also I think quite fun, and also to come along and do this special recording to wrap it all up and to try and make it useful for you debaters out there. With Andy's words ringing in our ears, do come along to one of our meetings. The link is below in the comment section. So see you at the next meeting.
You've been listening to the Debating Toastcast. Feel free to leave a comment, critical or encouraging. We welcome both. And if you'd like more information about joining the club or coming first as a guest, please have a look at our website, 104londondebaters.club, or send us an email on info@104londondebaters.club. That's info@104londondebaters.club. Thank you for listening.